This is a great exercise for runners and squatters. Today we're going to talk through who this might be right for and wrong for within those two categories. At the Training Stimulus, we've used this exercise many times to help people with knee pain, with hip mobility restrictions for runners and squatters, and we're going to go through today when it might be right, when it might be wrong, how to execute it correctly so that you can get the most out of it for yourself and your clients. Obviously, in a perfect world, you'll have done a detailed movement assessment to figure out somebody's specific restrictions, but this is a fairly broad brush thing you can add into somebody's warm-up and is fairly safe. Not too much is going to go wrong, but we will talk about the people who you do want to avoid this for. So let's have a look. Here we are mobilizing the lateral hip, so the outside, looking at glute med, those tissues on the outside of the hip in all three planes of motion. So notice the hip is outside the foot, the big toe is on the ground, and to start with, we're moving forwards and backwards, and then we're moving side to side, and then finally we're going to add some rotation for the transverse plane. So whilst staying in this hip adducted position, we are asking the hip to move in all three planes of motion. Which one more time. So to start with, we go forwards and back. So we're adding hip extension and flexion along with the hip adduction. Then we go side to side. So we're moving into more hip adduction and then slightly abducting the hip just to get some length and contractions from a lengthened position there. And then we rotate around the adducted hip. All the time, the foot is flat on the floor, so we're not kidding ourselves with how much hip adduction we're actually able to achieve. This is a great exercise for those people who struggle to access the inside edge of the foot. They struggle to allow and control knee valgus. A lot of people who have driven their knees out excessively during squatting will struggle to get into this position and might be unable to achieve a good amount of hip adduction. The people that should avoid this are those that are hypermobile in this joint motion. So if somebody naturally has their knees too far inside their hip, or if their knees collapse without control in running or in squatting, they probably have excessive hip mobility of the lateral hip. So they have too much uncontrolled hip adduction, and actually tightening this up will be a better strategy for them. Key cues to focus on. First one is try and stay in the frontal plane. So between those two imaginary panes of glass as usual. So not allowing the shoulders to turn unless we're doing the transverse plane version. We want to keep our eyes as forward as possible as well to keep the head stacked. So I'm not doing the best job of it here, overthinking things as usual. The other one is for the sagittal and frontal plane ones, keeping the body square. So trying not to add too much rotation between the shoulders and the hips until we get into the transverse plane one here. And then the focus should be on the pelvis rotating rather than the full body, but the shoulder can come with it too. That's not a problem. The focus is hip internal and external rotation. The other thing for these type of exercises, we want to relax and flow into the motion. We don't want to try too hard or force range. That causes things to tighten up, and we actually won't facilitate as much improvement in the range of motion, which is obviously what we're looking for. We also want to keep the elbow just above the shoulder there and the forearm and hand flush on the wall. This is so we don't put too much demand on the shoulder. If we go closer to a straight arm, especially with the hand high, puts a lot of workload into the shoulder, and it ends up becoming a shoulder stability exercise rather than a lateral hip mobility exercise. If we want to tweak things to be more demanding, we can use a ring. So hand holding a ring attached this way. That makes it a lot more demanding from a stability perspective. So the range of motion will probably shut down slightly, but depending if somebody needs tightening up rather than loosening off, that's one adjustment we can make. And if somebody's really struggling with this, we can put the other foot flat on the ground, either next to it or in a staggered stance, similar to the side plank setup we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. This gives even more stability and safety for somebody who might be reluctant to move into this position. I hope that was helpful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get access to over 600 other silly lunge-like movement mechanics exercises and all of these exercise of the week breakdowns and plenty of other free education. Comment below if there are any other exercises you want me to break down, and we'll get to it in the coming weeks.